the Youth Got Next podcast.
Yeah.
We are on stop number 9 as you're following along with us. And my name is Miles Richardson. I'm excited to be here, and I'm here with
Isaac Slayton. I'm also excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. We're diving into kind of an interesting stop here, where we're kind of in a transition stop. We're not necessarily in text right now so much as a stop that helps us make sense of where we're going to next, because we're in between Genesis. Like when we left off, we were on the story of Joseph, and Joseph's sold into slavery, and a lot's happened. We kind of talked about that, how he's into slavery, but he ends up being the second most powerful person in Egypt, and things are going pretty well. And so this kind of fills in the gaps between leaving there and coming into the book of Exodus.
Yeah, I like how you kind of refer to it as like a transition point to where it's like it kind of wraps up a little bit of the few stops that we had in Genesis, and then kind of reminds us and points us to where we're going to be going, specifically in the next book as a whole, but also just like reminding us. And I love how there's like a section in here in these couple pages. And if you're following with us, we're on page 76 and 77 in this little transition point. But there's a section that talks about how Jesus as the true north, which is just essentially referring to everything in the Bible is pointing towards Jesus. That's where we're stepping towards in this plan and in the whole Bible. And one of the sentences that stood out to me in this section was that God has a plan to reconnect with his people, and all of these stops are leading us closer to Jesus. And so that's, again, just a reminder that we get in this middle ground here.
I love that. And reconnect is the important word, because what we pick up on here, and the reason we kind of have this filler stop, is because there has been 430 years between the end of Genesis and where we pick up in Exodus. And now the entire story is in Egypt. Because if you remember at the end of Genesis, there was famine that drives everyone to Egypt, and Joseph gets to play a role in helping through that famine. Well, 430 years has passed, and the Pharaoh that was there 430 years ago was a great guy, brought Joseph up. Joseph got to be helpful. That Pharaoh's gone. It's been 430 years. Things aren't going so well at this point.
Yeah. And I love, in kind of preparing this and talking about it, one of the things that we mentioned is like, okay, this obviously is a transition point. So we get a look at where we have been and where are we going. And I think one of the things that's hopeful is that rescue is coming.
Yes.
That we see here that God hears his people. He sees them. His presence surrounds them. He's with them. And he also has a plan to deliver them as well. And I think it's cool that we get to see, God's big story play out over these next few stops in Exodus.
Yeah, I love that too, because if you think back a few stops ago, this is stop 5, actually. Back in Genesis chapter 15, we see that this time that they're about to spend in Egypt, it's promised. It says in chapter 15, verse 13, it says this. It says, then the Lord said to Abram, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. So that doesn't sound like a good time to be oppressed as slaves for 400 years, but you said the rescue is coming. And I love that because it's God connecting back with his people. It also is going to look like, we'll see in a little bit, Moses coming into the picture, which is just another interesting part of what that rescue is going to look like. So I love that.
I love, again, in this transition statement that we see, it talks about rescue and like reconnection as well. And again, I feel like this couple pages that we're looking at is all about, obviously, like where we're going. And I think one of the main things that we're going to see through these next points in Exodus is that God, that he shows he's faithful to the people, even when they're not faithful to him. Which we see that pattern time and time again in scripture. And I think that can offer us so much hope in our life into really discovering, how deep the love that God has for us, and that we get to see these people walk through that, and we can take that and apply that to our life as well. It's a cool thing that we're going to get to see.
Yeah, because as we go through Exodus, what's made definitely clear to us is that the people are not always trusting God so well. God's like, hey, I want you to do this. And they're like, I don't know if I trust that. I don't know if I'm going to go for that. And what we see is God doesn't just say, all right, well, I'm going to wipe my hands of this. I'm done. Y'all got it on your own forever. No, this rescue is coming. God is faithful. And I love that because we can kind of see that in our lives as
Sure.
well. You know, there's times where I think God is telling us clearly, hey, you need to do this, or hey, you need to stop doing this. And we're like, God, I got this. I know better. I've got this.
Yeah.
And we mess up.
Yeah.
And yet we see God is still faithful, even today, to forgive us, to help us. He's just faithful. We're going to see that so much.
And it definitely like makes me laugh sometimes. I hear like, oh, like the Old Testament doesn't really relate to us. Like it's just maybe some cool stories. It's just like a ton of history and stuff where it's like, no, like this is like real that can apply to our life too, because there's definitely been times like you say where we will mess up or we think we know better in this area where it's like we kind of maybe treat God like a genie where it's like, oh, I'm going to trust myself, but when I need help, like I'll hit you up. Like, but no, like we often fail God in many different areas, but he still shows his faithfulness to us and love, which is, I think it's going to be cool that we get to see this play out for them over the book of Exodus, which we can then apply to our life too, and maybe different way than you thought was even possible in your life before.
Sure. But it's just such a good reminder that the God that they had then is the same God we have today, and he was faithful to them then, so he's going to be faithful to us today. Yeah. So that's awesome.
That's good.
Well, guys, thanks for joining in on stop number 9.
Oh, yeah.
Join us next week as we jump into stop 10. We get into Exodus and the craziness that Exodus is. You know, it's going to be a couple of wild stops. So make sure to like, comment, subscribe on this video, share it with a few people.
Turn on those notifications.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the things that we also want to highlight is like, we want this to be a tool to help you as a like discipleship tool. So we would love for you to get together with your friends, your family, whoever you can get together with and go through this with us.
That's right.
And, you know, talk about it amongst yourselves as we do. Say what you think, say what sticks out to you. We want this to be, you know, an avenue for you guys to connect together and grow together and walk through this plan as well.
That's good. That's awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us. We're excited for next week and we'll see you then.
See you next time.